The divorce lawyer's paralegal handed me a printout on a Tuesday morning in the third week of February last year, and I sat with it in the waiting room of a Hua Hin law office for about 20 minutes before I could read it properly. It was a transfer history. 17 pages, pulled from 4 accounts, 2 that I knew about and 2 that I did not, covering the 7 years of our marriage. I want to tell you what I saw when I finally read it, and I want to tell you it slowly, because the speed at which these things are usually told is part of why men keep getting surprised by them. The total across all accounts, 7 years, 11.4 million baht. My name is Derek. I am 67 years old. I am a former logistics manager from Minneapolis, and I spent 7 years with a woman who never once asked me for a thing, and the printout in my hands was the record of everything I had given her without being asked. I need to place you precisely in November 2016, because the man who walked into a hotel bar in Hua Hin that month is the mechanism of this whole story, and if I describe him wrong, too stupid, too lonely, too easy, then the mechanism does not make sense, and you will spend this recording feeling superior, and that is not what I want for you. Let me tell you about the job first, because the job is what made the trap possible. For 22 years, I ran regional logistics for a distribution company out of Minneapolis. 12 states, 4,000 product lines, 7 distribution centers, and a reporting structure that required me to know, at any given moment, where every significant asset was and what it was doing. I was good at it. I was the man who could look at a variance report at 7 in the morning and identify, within about 40 seconds, whether the shortfall was a receiving error, a transit delay, or a theft. I ran 3 internal investigations across my career, all of which produced recoveries, and one of which produced a prosecution, and in each case the mechanism was the same. I followed the movement of small amounts across a long period until the pattern became undeniable. I tell you this not to position myself as clever. The rest of this recording will make that position untenable, but because it is the specific irony that defines my situation, which is that I spent 22 years professionally tracking the movement of other people's assets across a system. And across 7 years in Thailand, I did not once apply that skill to my own household, because applying it would have meant treating a marriage like a logistics problem. And treating a marriage like a logistics problem is precisely the thing I had come to Thailand to stop doing. She understood that. I will come back to that. I was 59. I had spent 22 years in logistics management for a distribution company out of Minneapolis, a job that required me to track the movement of roughly 4,000 SKUs across a 12-state region, which is to say that I was, professionally, a man who noticed when things did not add up. Before the logistics job, I had coached high school football for 11 years in Bloomington, which is the other thing that explains this story. Because coaching football is a job that requires you to read people, to see which kid is covering a fear, which one is performing confidence he does not feel, which play a defense is setting up by showing you what looks like an invitation. I was good at that too. I was good at both things, and I combined them in a career and a life that felt, from the outside, like competence. And competence is the thing that makes you a very specific kind of target, which is the kind that cannot believe it is a target. I had been divorced since 2009. My first wife Karen left for reasons that were fair and that I will not be going into. And I had, in the 7 years between then and Hua Hin, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Eden Prairie, and worked and watched football and eaten alone approximately 1,100 times. I should say something about those 1,100 evenings, because they are the context for every decision I made in Thailand, and I rarely hear them talked about honestly. They were not miserable. That is the first thing. I ate decent food, I watched games, I read, I called my daughter on Sundays, and my life was perfectly adequate. And adequate is exactly the word. And adequate, applied to a man's life for 7 years, begins to sound like a diagnosis. I had plenty. I did not have dinner with someone who was interested in my day. That is the entire deficit, and it is also, if you let it run for 7 years, an enormous one, and it creates in a man a specific and invisible hunger that he has no good vocabulary for, because the vocabulary his generation has for this kind of thing tends to involve the words lonely and pathetic, and he is neither, and so he does not reach for it, and so when it is filled he does not recognize what has been filled, because he never acknowledged that it was empty. She recognized it. I am almost certain of that. I am almost certain it was visible to a woman who was paying attention, which she was, from the first night. I was not, when I arrived in Thailand, a broken man or a desperate one. I was a functional man who was very, very tired of eating alone, and I want to make that distinction because it matters for everything that follows. Desperation makes bad decisions from weakness. Loneliness makes bad decisions from a position of complete apparent competence, and those are harder to see and much more expensive. I had been coming to Hua Hin for 3 years as a vacation destination before I moved there. I liked the pace, quieter than Pattaya, more Thai than Phuket, a beach town that had not yet decided to become a tourist attraction. I retired in September 2016 with a 401k distribution and Social Security starting at 62 that gave me about $3,100 a month and savings of approximately $310,000. The arithmetic was straightforward. Thailand on that income is comfortable. In the United States it is adequate, and adequate for 30 years had started to feel like a sentence. I was not running away. I was choosing. There is a difference, and I believed it, and I still believe it. And the believing it does not change what happened next. I met Nataya in November 2016 at the bar of the hotel where I was staying, while I looked for an apartment. She was 36, from Buriram originally but Bangkok for 12 years, working at a bank's call center in Hua Hin. She was there with 2 friends from the bank, and I was there with nobody, and she asked, "This is how it began, and I want to record it because the beginning mattered." She asked me, in good English, what I was reading. I was reading a book about the logistics of the D-Day landings, which is either the most or least attractive thing a man can be found reading in a hotel bar in Thailand. And she asked a genuine question about it, and I gave a genuine answer. And we talked for 2 hours, and at no point did she suggest that we continue the conversation anywhere. She gave me her line ID when I asked and said goodnight. That is the opening move of a very good plan and also the opening move of a genuine conversation, and for 7 years I could not have told you which one it was, and I am still not completely sure. The first 2 years after the wedding were the best of my life in Thailand, which is a sentence I have to deliver carefully because of what comes after it, but it is the truth. I want to be specific, because I have heard men in my situation flatten the entire marriage into a deception, and I find it dishonest, and I find it cowardly. In the summer of 2018, she taught me to make a proper Nam Jim seafood sauce, standing beside me in the kitchen, correcting my chopping in a way that was both impatient and patient, and I made it adequately on the 3rd attempt, and she said so, precisely, without inflation. We drove to Kanchanaburi for 3 days in October of that year, and stayed in a guest house where the long-tail boats went past the window at 5 in the morning. And she knew which temple was worth the walk, and which was worth the 10 minutes, and which was worth the half day, and she was right about all 3, and I did not have to manage a single thing for 3 days, and the not managing was the rest I did not know I had been needing. My brother Kevin came from St. Paul in March 2019, a big skeptical Irish American from the same neighborhood I grew up in, who had been waiting for this to go wrong since November 2016. And she made him feel welcome in a way that I, who have known him for 61 years, have sometimes failed to do. And on his last night he pulled me aside and said, in the exact tone of a man who had been wrong and has decided to be right about it, "She's good, Derek." She's good. He said it twice, which is how Kevin says things he means. I want Kevin on the record. He is not a fool, and he was not fooled. He saw what was in front of him, and what was in front of him was a real marriage, and it was real. She also filed the house paperwork, managed the utility accounts, handled every interaction with the landlord, the housekeeper, the repairman, the government office for my visa, and did all of it without error and without complaint. And I want to say plainly that if she had been paid for those services at a professional Thai rate, we would have been spending about 12,000 baht a month, which across 7 years would have been 1,008,000, and the 11.4 million printout would have been 9.6, which is still a very large number, and which I raise only because I am a logistics man and I believe in accounting for everything, including the things that argue against my case. I did not believe I was being managed. I believed I was loved. Over the first 6 months, she never asked me for anything. I want to say that again, because it is the whole engine. She never asked. I bought dinner because I had more money, and it was natural. I paid for the weekend in Kanchanaburi because I suggested it. I transferred 20,000 baht to her account in February 2017 because she mentioned, once, quietly, not as a request, that her mother's roof in Buriram had been damaged in a storm, and I said without being asked that I would like to help, and she said she couldn't accept it, and I insisted, and she accepted. That sequence, the mention without request, the offer without prompting, the resistance, the acceptance, repeated itself, in various forms, for 7 years. I have since reconstructed it with the paralegal's printout on the table beside me, and the sequence is so consistent across 81 separate transfers that it reads like a protocol. Not every item, but enough. Mention, offer, resist, accept. The resistance was always calibrated. Not so much that I withdrew, not so little that I felt manipulated. Exactly enough that I felt generous rather than solicited. That calibration, sustained across 7 years and 81 transactions, is the most impressive professional performance I have ever witnessed, and I include in that comparison 30 years of watching people manage supply chains under pressure. That sequence, the mention without request, the offer without prompting, the resistance, the acceptance, repeated itself, in various forms, for 7 years. I have since reconstructed it with the paralegal's printout on the table beside me, and the sequence is so consistent across 81 separate transfers that it reads like a protocol. Not every item, but enough. Mention, offer, resist, accept. The resistance was always calibrated. Not so much that I withdrew, not so little that I felt manipulated. Exactly enough that I felt generous rather than solicited. That calibration, sustained across 7 years and 81 transactions, is the most impressive professional performance I have ever witnessed, and I include in that comparison 30 years of watching people manage supply chains under pressure. I want to stay on this point because I think it is the piece that separates this story from the simpler ones. The simpler version of this genre has a woman who asks for money. She asks directly, or she invents crises, or she presents false paperwork, and the man is deceived. I was not deceived. I was read. There is a difference. Every request that reached me arrived as information, and never as solicitation, and the information was always true. Her mother's roof was damaged. Her brother's business did need capital. The house installments were real installments on a real house in which we actually lived. I was given accurate information about real needs, and I responded to it with my own money, of my own volition, and the accuracy of the information and the voluntariness of the giving are the reasons I have never been able to locate a crime in any of this. What she understood, and what I did not understand until I was sitting with the printout, is that a man who needs to give does not need to be asked. She created the conditions for giving and then waited, and the waiting was the genius of it, and I am the man who filled the silence. We married in June 2018. I want to give the good years their proper weight, because I have heard men in my situation flatten the entire marriage into a deception, and I cannot do that and stay honest. The first 2 years after the wedding were the best of my life in Thailand, which is a sentence I have to deliver carefully because of what comes after it, but it is the truth. She was funny in a way I had not expected. Dry, occasionally dark, with a sense of irony about Thai culture and Thai men that she deployed very precisely and that I found delightful. She cooked, better than I deserved. She came to my doctor's appointments and translated and took notes, and the notes were meticulous. When my brother visited from St. Paul in 2019, She made him feel welcome in a way that I, who have known him for 61 years, have sometimes failed to do. She planted things on the balcony. She remembered the date my mother died and said something about it. I did not believe I was being managed. I believed I was loved, and I want to acknowledge, with full awareness of how this recording ends, that the feeling and the belief were both real to me, and the realness of a feeling does not depend on the intentions of the person who produced it. The transfers. I have them all now. Before I go through them, I want to account for 2020, because 2020 is the year this recording could become dishonest if I skip it. The borders closed in March, and the island went quiet in a different way than the low season, and the quiet had a texture to it, a tension that I did not feel with her so much as in the space around her, if that makes any sense to anyone who has lived in a household during that period. We were together in the house for 17 consecutive months, which is more continuous cohabitation than most people who have been married for 2 years have managed. And I do not want to make too much of this because she was not unkind, and neither was I, and the household was functional. But something changed in 2020 that I noticed and filed away without examining, which is that she began going upstairs to make phone calls more regularly than she had before, and she began staying up later than me, and the transfers to her mother's account in Buriram, which had been running at about $15,000 a month, shifted to $22,000 beginning in April 2020 and stayed there. I attributed all of this to COVID stress, because COVID stress is the explanation that a year of collective anxiety has trained us to accept without scrutiny, and the explanation was not impossible, and I accepted it because accepting it was easier than the alternative. I include it here because it is on the printout, and the printout does not accept partial entries. The transfers. I have them all now. Let me go through the categories because the categories are the education, housing. In 2019 we moved from my rented condo to a house in a development west of town. The house was purchased in her name, the land as always, and I paid the down payment of 1.2 million baht from savings, and the monthly installments of 22,000 from my Social Security. That is 1.2 million plus 2,880,000 over 11 years of installments that I would never complete, 4.08 million from this category alone. Her mother's house in Buriram, roofs, plumbing, a kitchen extension, a new floor in the main room, eventually a second building for the brother and his family. Total across 7 years, 1,400,000 baht. The brother's business, a small hardware shop in Buriram that failed twice and was refunded twice, 840,000. Medical, legitimate and verified. Her mother's eyes, her father's hospitalization in 2020, her own dental work, 360,000. And I want to be clear that I do not begrudge a baht of the medical money, because sick people needed treatment, and I had the money, and I would do it again. Gold, 580,000 baht across 9 purchases, 7 of which I initiated because I wanted to give her something that felt permanent. The remaining transfers, the miscellaneous column that the paralegal labeled simply personal transfers, no documented purpose, 640,000 baht. Total, 11.4 million, $294,000 at the rates I transferred at, 95% of what I arrived with. I want to be honest about the rate of transfer, because most men tell this story as though it happened fast, and mine did not. 11.4 million baht across 7 years is about 135,000 baht a month, which sounds like a large number until you distribute it properly. The house installment, 22,000, a grocery run for the extended family that stayed with us periodically, 6,000, a transfer to her mother's account that felt like an allowance and was 15,000, the gold purchase for her birthday that was entirely my idea, various. No single month looked like a robbery. Most months looked like a marriage. The sum only becomes visible when you lay it all on a table and total it, which I did not do in 7 years, and which the paralegal did in 4 days. And the difference between those two timelines is the mechanism of every story in this genre, and the reason I am recording this, instead of eating dinner alone in Minneapolis. The discovery did not come from suspicion. That is the part I find hardest to tell, because a man who discovers this through a sharp instinct or a careful investigation at least has the consolation of having been right about something. I discovered it because we were divorcing, and the divorce required a financial disclosure, and the financial disclosure required pulling the account histories, and the account histories told me things I had not known about accounts I had not known existed. I should tell you why we were divorcing first, because the divorce is where every man I tell this to goes immediately, and the answer is probably not what they expect. We were divorcing because in the autumn of 2023 she told me, on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table with the same directness she had always used for important things, that she had met a man and that she wanted to end the marriage and that she would like to do it correctly and without ugliness. The man was Thai, about 40, in construction, from near her home in Buriram. I do not know more than that, because I did not ask more than that, because asking felt like the beginning of an argument I did not want, and that would not change the outcome. She was 43. We had been married 5 years at the point she told me, and the conversation was so reasonable and so clean that I spent about 3 days afterward trying to locate the moment it went wrong, and I could not find one, which turned out to be accurate and also to be the problem. We separated in November 2023. I moved to a serviced apartment while the legal work was arranged, and it was in the course of the legal work that the paralegal handed me the printout. There was a savings account in her name at a different bank that I learned about from the disclosure. It contained 3.2 million baht. There was a land holding in Buriram, separate from her mother's plot, that I also learned about from the disclosure. It had been purchased in 2020 and was worth approximately 1.8 million baht by current valuation. Both the account and the land had been built from the transfers I had made to her, carefully, over years, in amounts and intervals that fell below the pattern a man thinks of as saving. She had been saving, methodically, into a structure I did not know existed. And when the paralegal put page 11 of the printout in front of me and pointed to the account number, I sat in a law office in Hua Hin and understood, for the first time in 7 years, that I had not been a husband with a generous nature. I had been a vehicle. Now here is what I will not do. And I want to say this clearly because it is the only thing about this story that I am proud of. I should tell you what the 4 months between reading the printout and signing the settlement felt like, because I have heard men describe this period as rage, and I have heard others describe it as grief, and mine was neither. It was closer to what a logistics man calls root cause analysis, the methodical backward walk from outcome to origin. I sat in a serviced apartment in Hua Hin for 4 months, with the printout and a notebook, and I reconstructed it, not to build a case. There was no case to build. Everything was legal. Everything was voluntary. But because I needed to understand the architecture, I needed to know whether there was a point at which a different decision by me would have produced a different outcome, and if so, where that point was. I spent perhaps 80 hours on this. The answer, when I arrived at it, was both clear and useless. The decision point was November 2016, in a hotel bar, when I chose to stop being the man who tracked things. And from that decision, all the others followed, and she had identified the decision before I had made it. There was no other point. There was no moment at which the mechanism could have been interrupted by anything except being a different man, and being a different man was the thing I had come to Thailand specifically not to be. That is the circle. I have been walking it for 14 months and it does not open. I will not tell you she was a monster. I have sat with this for 14 months, and I have tried very hard to do the thing I spent 30 years doing in logistics, which is to follow the chain backward from the outcome to the cause. And the cause is not a monster. The cause is a woman who grew up in Buriram with a sick mother, a brother with no capital, a family that depended on her, and a bank call center salary of about 18,000 baht a month, which is the number you start from if you want to understand any of the decisions that followed. She met a man who had $310,000, who ate alone 1,100 times, who was looking for permanence, who offered before being asked, and who was constitutionally unable to track what he was spending on the people he loved, because tracking felt like distrust. She read that man accurately. She built a structure around those readings. And across 7 years she assembled, piece by piece, in amounts so reasonable they were individually invisible, a foundation for herself and her family that I could not touch, in a country where the law would not help me touch it even if I could. And she did it without lying to me about a single thing, except what she was doing with the money, and what she would do when she had enough of it. I call that a very precise deception, and I also call it an act of survival. And I have decided that both of those things can be true, and that deciding which one is the main one is above my pay grade. The divorce was settled in March last year. Under Thai law and the terms of our marriage agreement, such as it was, we did not have a proper prenuptial. Another decision I made that seemed reasonable at the time. She retained the house, the Buriram land, the savings account. I retained my Social Security, my remaining savings of about $16,000, and the right to stay in the country she was no longer living in. The lawyer asked me whether I wanted to contest any element of the settlement, and I want to tell you the answer I gave, and why I gave it, because it is the clearest window into where I am now. I said no, not because I could not argue the case. There were elements of the transfer history that a Thai court might have found instructive, but because arguing the case would have required me to characterize my marriage as a fraud in a legal document, and I am not able to do that, because I do not know whether it was. What I know is that the transfers were voluntary, that the marriage was real in the ways I have described, that the savings account and the land existed, and that the savings account and the land were built from what I gave, and that whether the building of them was planned from the beginning or evolved over time is a question to which I have no answer and no access, and I decided in that law office that I was not going to spend whatever is left of my money purchasing a legal verdict on a question that is fundamentally unverifiable. I signed where I was shown. The settlement cost me $278,000 against a starting position of $310, and I have $16,000 left, and a pension, and the city of Hua Hin, and I am going to stay. I have since moved to a rental apartment in Hua Hin town, 3,500 baht a month, converted to dollars. My Social Security covers it. Barely. I eat at the market most evenings at 80 baht a meal, and I am not going to pretend that this is fine, because fine is not the word I would choose, but I will say that at 67, alone in Hua Hin with the sea 20 minutes away and a market that has excellent noodles, I have resources I did not have in Eden Prairie, which is the ability to walk somewhere and eat something that costs less than a parking ticket and not feel it as a deprivation. That is Thailand giving back something small, and I will take it. My daughter Melissa in Minneapolis knows the shape of it but not the number, and I have no plans to tell her the number, because the number is not information she can use, and it is information that would cost her something. Let me tell you what Melissa does know, because the management of what she knows is its own chapter in this story, and it belongs here. She knows I was married, and that it ended. She knows I am staying in Thailand. She knows I am on a budget. She does not know about the printout, the 4 accounts, the Buriram land, the savings account. She does not know that I spent $1,700 hiring the paralegal to reconstruct 7 years of transfers into a document that would have been the most useful piece of paper I could have had on our wedding day, and that arrived, instead, at the dissolution. She called me in April last year and asked how I was doing in the specific tone she uses when she suspects the answer to the question is not what she is going to be told, and I said fine, which was the same word I gave myself every morning at the market, and it has the same truth content in both contexts, somewhere between 30 and 70%, depending on the morning. She asked me once whether I was going to come home, and I told her I did not know, and she said that she would come out to see me in the fall, and she did come, in October, and we sat on the beach at Khao Takiab, and she did not ask me anything directly, and I did not volunteer anything. And we ate fried rice at a beach restaurant, and I paid 150 baht for both of us, and she looked at the bill and said, "This is insane." And I said it was. and it was the most comfortable I had felt in a year, which says something about the value of sitting on a beach with someone who knew you before any of this. She asked her last morning whether I was happy here, and I said yes in the way that men say yes to their daughters when the alternative is a conversation that would take both of them somewhere neither of them is ready to go. And she held my arm at the airport and did not say the thing she was thinking, and I held hers and did not say the thing I was thinking. And that restraint on both sides is what passes for kindness in a family that learned to communicate through football games and Sunday phone calls, and it is the best we have, and it has been enough for 67 years, and I have decided it will continue to be. She asked whether I was going to come home, and I said I did not know, which is the truth. Home is a word I have been revising for several years and I have not finished. I have been in Thailand since 2016, and I know where the good noodles are, and I know the name of my landlord's dog, and I know 3 words of Thai that are correct, and a dozen that are incorrect, and I have given up trying to fix the dozen. Home is a word I have been revising for several years, and I have not finished. I have been in Thailand since 2016, and I know where the good noodles are, and I know the name of my landlord's dog, and I know 3 words of Thai that are correct, and a dozen that are incorrect, and I have given up trying to fix the dozen. Let me tell you what my days look like, because the days are where I actually live, and the recordings never include them. I wake at 6. The market on the Solway behind my building opens at 5:30, and by 6, the vendors have their steam up and the air smells of stock and charcoal. And I buy a bag of cow tom, which is a rice soup with pork and ginger, for 50 baht, and I eat it at a plastic table that has been there since before I arrived and will be there after I leave. The vendor is a woman of perhaps 70, whose granddaughter helps on Saturdays. She does not speak English, and I do not speak Thai, and we have communicated entirely in pointing and nods for about 3 years, and I consider this one of my more successful relationships. At 7 I walk to the beach, which takes 11 minutes if I go direct, and 20 if I go the way I prefer, past the fresh market and the school and the shrine with the red offerings, and I walk on the beach for about 40 minutes, and then I buy a coffee from a cart and sit on a wall and watch the fishing boats. This is my life. It costs about 900 baht a day, including rent, which is $26, which is less than I paid for a single lunch in Minneapolis. And I am not going to pretend that the arithmetic of that does not give me something, because it does, even now, especially now. At 67, after what I have described, there is a specific satisfaction in a life that is exactly what it costs. No hidden accounts, no categories. 50 baht for breakfast. The beach at 7. The landlord's dog named Nua who has decided I am acceptable. The noodle soup that is the same every day and that I have not once eaten without wanting it. That is not nothing. It is not $310,000, but it is not nothing. Here is what I want you to take from this recording. And I want to be specific, because the general advice, be careful, get a prenup, don't trust too quickly, is useless. You already know it. Every man who has heard these stories knows it, and every man who has heard these stories and lost has lost anyway, because the general advice does not locate the specific mechanism. The specific mechanism in my case was this. I did not track what I was giving, because tracking felt like distrust, and not trusting felt like not loving, and not loving was the thing I had been doing for 7 years in Eden Prairie, and I had come to Thailand specifically to stop doing it. She understood that before I did. She understood it on the night we talked about the D-Day landings in the hotel bar, and she used it, carefully, for 7 years, and the using of it was the shape of our marriage, and the marriage was real in every way, except the one that turned out to matter, which is that she was building something with the materials, and I was just living in it. So here is the specific advice that is worth the length of this recording. Keep a number, not a budget, not a spreadsheet, not a system, just one number, updated monthly, in your phone, that says, this is what I have given this year. I want to be exact about what I mean by this, because the version I have heard other men give is track everything and get a prenup. And these are not wrong, but they are not what I mean. A prenup would not have changed my outcome, because my outcome was legal. Tracking everything would have required a discipline I was not going to maintain, because I came to Thailand to stop maintaining that kind of discipline. What I mean is this. Once a month, on the same day, open the transfer history in your banking app and add up what moved to her account, her family's accounts, anything you paid for her or them. Write the total down. That is the number. You do not need to do anything with it. You do not need to evaluate it, or judge it, or compare it to a limit. You just need to know it, because knowing it converts the giving from ambient to chosen, and chosen is the only kind of giving that a man can afford in a country where the law does not protect what he gives. A man who knows his number is a man who is choosing to spend that amount on this person this year. A man who does not know his number is discovering it in a law office, and that is a terrible place to see it for the first time, and the paralegal charges by the hour. I gave 11.4 million baht across 7 years, and I do not know, month by month, when it stopped feeling like generosity and started feeling like a negotiated extraction, because I was not keeping the number. That is not her fault. She was doing what the situation required of her. The fault, if fault is the word, and I am not sure it is that I came to Thailand to stop being careful, and I stopped being careful, and that is both the truest thing about why I am here and the reason I am talking to you. I want to end with something that is not quite a lesson and not quite a consolation, because I am tired of recordings that end with wisdom, as though what happened was a tuition fee, and we are all enrolled in the same course. I want to end with something that is not quite a lesson and not quite a consolation, because I am tired of recordings that end with wisdom, as though what happened was a tuition fee and we are all enrolled in the same course. I should tell you about the men in Hua Hin first, because Hua Hin has a long-stay expat community, and long-stay communities know things about each other, and several men here know my situation in the way that men know things, through the specific silence that descends when you walk into a bar and two people stop a conversation. 3 of them have come to me separately over the past year, in the casual way men approach things they cannot ask about directly, and they have each said some version of the same thing, which is that it could have been them, and I want to tell you what I said back, because it is the one piece of advice in this recording that I have field-tested on men who are currently inside their own versions of my situation. I said, "Do you know your number? Not your balance. Your number, what you have given in the past 12 months, to this person, count it up." Every man I asked said some version of, "Not exactly." And I said, "Go find out. Not because the number is wrong. Maybe it is right. Maybe you want to give that much and it is fine. But a man who knows his number chose to give it. A man who does not know his number is discovering it in a law office. And that is a terrible place to see it for the first time. Last month I went back to the house. Not to look at it. I drove past it by accident, taking a wrong turn outside of town. The garden that I built is in good condition. The bougainvillea I planted on the west wall has grown across the whole facade. The light was on in the kitchen at about 7 in the evening, and I could see a figure moving, and I drove on, and I want to tell you what I felt, not because it reflects well on me, but because it is what I felt. I was glad the bougainvillea had taken. I know exactly how that sounds. I am going to tell you it anyway, because the bougainvillea was mine. I chose it, I planted it, I watched it establish in the first wet season, and it is still there, and that is either a consolation or a punishment, and I have decided it is neither, and it is simply a plant on a wall, doing what plants do, and I planted it, and that part of the house still belongs to me in the only way that turns out to matter, which is that I know it.